You know what, for years and years and years, I romanticized the struggle life so bad. When I was in that phase of like romanticizing the struggle life when I was in my early 20s, I kind of like, yeah, almost like in a weird way, romanticized being sad. You know, we see it in movies, in Bridget Jones, in like all these like different rom-coms of when we lose the guy or when something bad happens at our job, and you know, we're just sat in the bath with a cigarette, like romanticizing being sad. Like that's what, I don't know, I feel like I looked at that and I thought like that's gonna be me when I'm 20, 30. Like we just romanticize those things because I feel like that's kind of part of our upbringing. We don't have to struggle though. And I think, contrary to popular belief, struggling doesn't set you up for success. I've been reading a book called The Happiness Advantage, and it literally demonstrates that there is scientific research that if you position yourself to be happy before you take on a project, before you do something, before you do work, you are significantly more likely to do better. So, contrary to popular belief, happiness is the prerequisite to success, to becoming a better version of yourself. But we're often told it's kind of like, no, we have to kind of go through the struggle, go through the hardship first, and then we'll be happy. Once we've done all the work to get to where we want to be, we've earned the money, we've got the family, we've got the partner, we've got the lifestyle, then we'll be happy. But actually, that's not the case. It starts with happiness. And I think this kind of sets up the video really well, because there's 5 things I'm going to go into which I feel like can really hold us back from feeling that happiness, from being in a positive space. I'm not saying toxic positivity, nobody has time for that, but just position yourself to be in a much more robust place for yourself and mentally much better. We set ourselves up so much for failure when we think that we need to struggle before we succeed. It's just not the case. We can thrive first, and that's actually going to propel us further than we could ever imagine, to be honest. First thing that, oh my God, I struggled with so bad in my 20s, and to be honest with you, as soon as I remember being sort of romantic and finding people attractive, is limerence. Being in limerence. It completely controls your life, maybe specifically your dating life, but to me, it controlled my entire life. I've actually done a whole video on escaping limerence, which you can watch here or down below. I'm just going to put the image here. Limerence is basically where you get so infatuated by a specific person, you start thinking about the future, you start getting really excited about, you know, what you could do with them, and you don't really know them that much. You get very attached to whatever that particular object of your desires, usually it's a person, you get very, very like invested, attached way too early. And it's actually, for me anyway, it came from a place of a lack in myself. Like I had a hole in me that wanted to be validated, wanted to be reassured, wanted to be accepted by somebody, and I wanted somebody to think that I was attractive, and it caused me so much anguish. I struggled so much because my life was controlled by it. Throughout uni, I remember literally not being able to focus on assignments, not being able to focus on my friends, not being able to focus on my mental health because I was so consumed by whoever I was like interested in at the time. And it's such a challenging thing to get out of, but it is so possible to get out of. Again, go and watch my video on how to escape this, but being able to come out of limerence and work on not getting so attached is so key, because the thing is, as we all know, being attached to anything is signing us up for suffering. When you get really invested, when you get really attached to something and you rely on that for your happiness, it's such shaky ground. They could change their mind at any point, they could start treating you poorly, they could reject you even. It's such an unstable place for your happiness to come from. Your happiness needs to come from here, and building your self-esteem outside of whoever is romantically interested in you or whoever you're romantically interested in. All that energy is in being invested into a potential of somebody. When we're in limerence, we often get very invested in the potential of somebody. And I've often found, like looking back at the people that I was interested in during the time when I was in limerence, were very average people, were very normal men, but my brain romanticized them and put all of this idea of like who I wanted them to be onto them, and put, you know, I would see so much potential in them, and I realized what I was actually doing was placing what my ideal person would look like to me and who they would be, what they would represent, and placing it onto whoever my objective desires was at the time. And obviously, through no fault of their own, they were disappointing me. I was becoming disappointed because I placed something on them that they had never shown, they had never demonstrated. Instead of just walking away and knowing, look, they're not showing up in the way that I want them to, I would stay and hope that they would change. I would stay and hope that they would one day kind of fulfill this potential that I had placed onto them, that they had at no point said that they wanted to become, or even shown any demonstration that they wanted to become. It's only ever going to fail, and it's only ever going to leave you disappointed and thinking, oh, this is not what I signed up for. But it kind of was. When we're in limerence as well, we end up kind of getting way ahead of ourselves, romanticizing the future, thinking about what they'll be like. You know, some people even think about family, like all sorts. And when that inevitably is dashed because, you know, they don't show up as the person that you want them to be, you then have to grieve all of those things that you romanticize. You have to grieve the potential that they never became. You have to grieve the version of them that you wanted them to be. You have to grieve the future that you envisioned with them, all of which is a complete waste of time, and all of which is because you became attached to something that was fickle, fluid, and not stable at that point. You know, it's too early. And attachment, again, is the root. It's like getting very attached to potentials, to chances. And that is such an unstable place to put your happiness in, such an unstable place to be putting all your hopes of the future in. That really needs to come from yourself, and that needs to come from internal validation rather than external validation. So limerence keeps you distracted from your goals, and it's a place of struggling. You know, the amount of times I would not, like I said, not be able to function or engage in normal activities or enjoy life because I was in limerence and I was kind of thinking of a particular romantic interest at the time, and that was controlling my life, and I couldn't focus on things that actually I needed to focus on. It just held me back so much, and it really made me struggle. Being in limerence is a really, really hard place to be in. It literally takes everything from you and leaves you with nothing. It's never leading to a positive outcome. It always leaves you feeling like, huh? Like what? Like it leaves you feeling in the lurch, and it can take such a toll and a drain on your everyday life and your emotions when you're investing so much of your emotional energy into, you know, being in limerence with somebody. I feel like for me it was a bit of a distraction, like from my own life as well. Like if I was in limerence, then I could focus on that rather than focus on my goals, which were kind of overwhelming for me at the time. Tell me your thoughts. If you've been in limerence or you are in limerence, talk to me. Connected to this is self-sabotage, and this can happen in limerence as well. When you're in this limerence state, you meet somebody who you're romantically interested in and they show a few red flags, but you ignore them. That's self-sabotage, because if they are not showing up for you in the way that you want, their actions don't meet their words, they're being disingenuous with you, it feels like love bombing, your gut feels off. If you are then to continue to pursue that, or, you know, not trust those feelings and not trust those red flags, at that point it is, you know, self-sabotage. It's doing things knowing that you will probably get hurt in the future, knowing that it's not good for you, knowing that it's not what you're looking for. Obviously, if you think about it logically, why would anybody do anything that is to the detriment of themselves or their mental health or their physical health even? Why would anybody do anything that isn't good for them? And one of the reasons why people continue to do things that are self-sabotage is because that person, that thing, that space is familiar to them. Our brain often chooses to opt for things that are familiar rather than things that we know are good for us. Because sometimes we know that the things that are good for us in the long run actually are not very comfortable in the short term. They're not pleasant. We don't like to do them. We often look at people's situations and we think to ourselves, you know, why are they still there? Why are they still in that situation? What is it that they kind of feel drawn to about this person, this space, or this situation? And it's because it's familiar to them. Their brain is like, oh, that's familiar, I'm going to go with that, even if it's not actually the best situation for them. It's like how sometimes people continue to be close to family members that hurt them perpetually, or people who stay in a relationship that they really shouldn't stay in because it's scary to be single, and that's uncomfortable in the short term. So they continue to be with somebody who they don't actually feel aligned with because it's too uncomfortable in the short term, even though in the long run that would actually be beneficial for them. Just like keeping around, you know, friends that you probably outgrown or maybe don't make you feel good. Sometimes we stay in those friendships because it's familiar. It makes us feel, I guess, some sense of like belonging, even though when we hang out with them we feel so alone. And again, you look at these things and you think, why would anybody do that logically, intellectually? But we do, because it's familiar and because we are riding on that short term instead of the long term. You know, we struggle to really have that hindsight as humans to think, this is not great for me right now, but it will be in the future. And then obviously the other way around, like, this isn't great for me long term, but I'm gonna do it anyway because it's fun and it's exciting and it feels right. So I think, again, self-sabotage is a weird one because all of us do it. Some of us try and like work through not doing it, but self-sabotage will be something that drains you because, like I said, you've in this situation, say if you're in limerence, you ignore the red flags, you have ended up wasting your time further down the line when those red flags become too red for you to ignore and you have to move on. And then you have to go through the whole process of feeling upset and feeling, you know, having to grieve the relationship and so on. Self-sabotage leaves us feeling very drained. It distracts us from our goals. It distracts us from other things that would make us happy in our life. It's a complete energy drain, all for the purpose of a short-term high, a short-term kick. I think about jobs that I used to be in and I knew that they weren't right for me and I knew that I should have left way earlier than I did, but I was self-sabotaging because I was thinking, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve a better job, like this is the best I'm ever going to get. And I think as well, self-sabotage tends to come from a place of thinking that we're not good enough. And again, I'll always come back to this in this video, building up your self-worth, building up your understanding of how worthwhile you are is going to prevent you from this sort of struggle life, because you don't want to struggle anymore. You want to live a fulfilling life when you get to this point where you're like, I don't want to struggle life anymore. It's not romantic, it sucks and it's draining everything from me. And I think this is like the antithesis of self-sabotage is self-love, because when we like ourselves enough, when we think that we're worth something, when we think that we matter, we can no longer do things that we know are bad for us, or we find it more unattractive to do things that are self-sabotage, even if they're pleasurable in the short term. For example, for me, I do love a night out. I love going and getting drinks. I love, you know, the fun that comes with going and drinking and having a night out. But I know I'll pay for it the next day and I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. I have obviously, you know, a couple sometimes, but I can no longer go on those heavy nights out, especially every weekend, because I know that it's sabotaging my ability to show up for myself with content creation, with work, with my businesses. If I were to do that, that would be self-sabotage. And I think for a long time I was doing that. I no longer want to be after work going and getting Mackies because I feel sad. I can't do that anymore, because all I'm thinking every time I think about going and getting one is just how bad it would be for my gut, how bad it would be for my mental health. Like I'd feel sluggish afterwards. But for a long time I wouldn't have that sort of foresight. I'd just do it anyway because I was like, in that moment I just want it. But now I'm just like, I can't, because I know that it's gonna cause problems for me. I'm not gonna feel very well, like I'm gonna be affected physically. And so I think that when you get to that point where you're like, the things that I used to do that were self-sabotaging, like they weren't actually good for me in the long run and they wouldn't actually make me feel good ultimately, those things kind of become unattractive when you start to sort of practice self-love. And if we kind of practice clocking when we're about to self-sabotage, we're about to kind of do something that isn't for the greater good for ourselves, that's a really important step, because we no longer will be draining our energy, we'll no longer waste so much energy and time on things that fundamentally didn't serve us, and we'll be able to reserve that for things that actually make us happy and things that actually make us thrive. I would get the fuck away from anywhere that requires you to be inauthentic and requires you to be a lesser, more minimized version of yourself. This struggle sucks. It's horrible. Like literally pretending to be somebody else for your friends, for your family, for your partner, for work is a waste of your life. Is a waste of your life, especially when you can be in places where people celebrate your authenticity. For such a long time, I was in work and jobs that required me to abandon myself, required me to be a minimized version of myself, required me to people please, required me to basically be a very minimal version of myself. And fortunately, I'm in a job now where I can be my full self. I genuinely feel so happy because people really accept me for exactly who I am. And it's probably the first time in my life where I've actually felt like that. Last year even, I decided to remove some of my friends from my life that were making me feel like shit and were basically requiring me to be an inauthentic version of myself. And by God, has it had its benefits. I don't overthink anymore. I'm not worried about whether or not somebody accepts me or not. I'm not worried about being judged. I know that my friends now accept me for exactly who I am, and we can have difficult conversations. We can have conversations where we are our best selves and our not so good selves, and that is so glorious. And I cannot believe I spent 5 years of my life surrounding myself with people that wanted me to be a version that they accepted rather than a version of me that I wanted to be. I literally minimized myself for other people to accept me because I was worried about being rejected. I was worried about being abandoned. And I think it's the thing with struggling. You think that weirdly you will struggle when people abandon you, when you have no friends, when you are alone. But what's worse is being around people that make you feel alone in their presence. That is more lonely than just being on your own. And eventually you will get to a point where you have people in your life that make you feel wanted and celebrated. But sometimes you do have to go through a period of time where you are like physically alone. Doesn't mean that you feel alone sometimes. Certainly in the past year, I've loved my introversion time. I've loved having fewer friends because it makes me feel like I can recharge and like get to know myself a lot more. And you'd think that that would suck because that's what society tells you. It's like, oh, if you've got no friends, you're a fucking weirdo. Like, not true. So many people thrive on their own. So many people thrive on a smaller circle. I saw a post recently on TikTok and it was like, the more friends you have, low key, the more you have to abandon yourself, like the less authentic you're probably being because you have to be acceptable to all those different people. And I see what they're saying. Obviously it's not going to be the case for everybody, but basically the more people that you are close with and the more friends that you have, the less time you have to yourself to get to know yourself for a start, and the less probably you're being yourself with every single one of them. There's something's not quite working out there. Being in spaces that require you to abandon yourself and require you to be an inauthentic version of yourself will drain you so much. Even if you think about work, for example, you're having to go to a job probably that you're not that bothered about. I mean, you might really enjoy your job, that's great. You're having to go to a job which requires you to give of yourself, requires you to give labour. Having to then do emotional labour on top of that, to just even turn up to work, is like double the amount of effort if people at work don't make you feel like you can be authentic. And I can imagine if you feel like you can't be authentic at work, you probably don't enjoy work anyway. So you're having to do double the amount of work to just get through the day, just get through the job, but also interact with people that you really don't gel with and that you really don't like and require you to be a lesser version of yourself. Like, what's the point? There are so many jobs out there that will not make you feel this way. Like, I can attest to that. There are so many places where you can find community and you do not have to stay in a place that doesn't celebrate you and doesn't sort of make you feel like you can just be yourself. What I would do with this is just be your authentic self, and whatever works, stick with it. Whichever person, space, experience, whatever it is, doesn't, move away from. If your work doesn't make you feel like you can be authentic, search for other jobs. Or even make the jump and work for yourself. If your friend group or your friends require you to abandon yourself, find out a way to obviously communicate that you don't want to be friends with them anymore or move on from them, and be okay with being alone for a bit. That's not struggle. It will not be. When you get there, you'll be like, oh, this is like such a relief. You're doing charity work at that point if you are having to be inauthentic to be around these people, because if they don't serve you and you're just wanting to be accepted, you're scared of being alone, it's not a good enough reason. It's a bit scary, but it's still not a good enough reason. Nothing is worth you abandoning yourself for. Closely linked to this is, of course, people pleasing. I'm a recovering people pleaser. Really struggled with it for the majority of my life. Still do, of course, but I'm very aware of it now. I'm very self-conscious of my people pleaser tendencies. And ever since being conscious of it and being aware of when I'm doing it, of the people that I'm doing it around and the spaces that I'm doing it around, I have been able to recover from it. When we are a people pleaser, we are very concerned with being liked. We're very concerned with people accepting us. And so we will pretty much do anything in our power to be liked, especially when we are maybe less aware of it and we're in that space of like just needing acceptance and we don't want to be rejected. We will literally adjust ourselves to cater for other people's needs and put our needs right at the back burner. How fucking draining is that? Like, you are literally pretending to be somebody else and struggling to put on this mask just so that people will stay in your life that probably aren't even meant for you anyway. Because if they were, they would just accept you for who you are. Anybody that requires you to be a people pleaser towards them, anybody that requires you to be boundaryless, anybody that requires you to give of yourself completely to them and drain you of energy is not for you. I can categorically say that. They're not for you. Anybody that makes you feel alive, it's such a high vibrational conversation when you see them, you feel like, energized when you see them, they're for you. Not the people that drain you, not the people that require you to be trodden all over in order to be connected to them, no. When you're so concerned with being liked, again, you're on this shaky ground of like, all your self-worth is put into whether or not somebody else validates you, whether or not somebody accepts you. So when they show that they don't, or when they show that they don't really like you, or they don't really feel like they gel with you, it's gonna crumble your self-worth, because your self-worth is based on their acceptance. And when they don't accept you, or when they don't maybe feel like maybe you're a good fit for them, you're going to feel upset, because as well, you're trying so hard for them to accept you, trying so hard for them to like you, that when you don't get the outcome that you hoped for with them, you then feel disappointed. It's like you set yourself up for failure. But if you act in authentic ways, if you act authentically, you're just naturally going to draw in the right people anyway. You don't need to do any work. The thing is with true friendships is that it doesn't really require work. Like, yes, of course, in the sense of like, you need to communicate, you need to be consistent, you need to show up for each other, obviously. But what I'm saying is, when you're developing a friendship with them, it should be easy. It should be no work at all. It shouldn't be forced. It should just be very natural. And if it doesn't feel like that, if you feel like you're constantly having to sort of put on a mask or put on a front to get people's acceptance, they probably aren't a good fit. They just aren't. And people pleasing is also draining, because you end up overexerting yourself when you need to support yourself. Like, we find it very difficult to say no. I mean, less so now, fortunately for me, but we often end up going to things that we don't want to go to, draining our energy by saying yes when we really want to say no, overextending ourselves for people, putting their needs first, when actually maybe we need to recharge and we need to put ourselves first at times. It's getting that balance between being, a little bit selfish and also selfless, having that good balance, not being on one end or the other. Nobody likes selfish people, and they're not setting themselves up for kind of like relationship success anyway. And then obviously completely selfless people, they're going to end up resenting everybody else in their life, because they're putting their needs behind everybody else's, and it just doesn't set anybody else or anybody up for success in their relationships or friendships. Being able to work on your people pleaser tendencies and being able to start being more selfish, if you could even call it that, then that's really going to save us so much energy. And you no longer have to struggle. You do not have to struggle in your friendships. You don't have to struggle in your relationship. You do not have to struggle with your family dynamic, because you can have boundaries to make sure that it works in the way that is best for you. You don't have to struggle through it. You don't have to struggle being connected to somebody in your family because they're family. You don't have to do it. If they make you feel like shit, if they leave you feeling awful, you don't have to do it. You don't. I know that they might make you feel guilty. They might make you feel awful. Society, I know that really shames people who decide to walk away from their family members at times. That's a reflection of them, because they're probably scared that their family are going to reject them because they know that they've been a dick. There's nothing wrong with you choosing exactly who you have in your life, and it doesn't matter if they're family, friends, relationship, you get to choose that. And when you are more selective with those people, when you show up authentically and when you show up exactly who you are, you of course draw those people in and you maintain the right people, and then you no longer struggle. You are just happiest in your relationships because you know that everybody who's in your life is there because they like you for who you are and nothing else. Final thing I will say in terms of struggling is being driven so heavily by your ego. When we're so driven by our ego, we first of all take things personally that really are not personal. We waste a lot of energy doing that, but we also misread things that happen to us as a sometimes negative thing. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this. For example, when we are driven by ego, often when we are presented with challenges, for example, we have to do double the amount of work, not only to get over the challenge, but also get over the mental battle of this victim mentality that is, oh, why does this always happen to me? Why is the world against me? What is it that I do wrong? Why am I being confronted with these challenges? Is it a sign that I shouldn't be doing this? Is it a sign that I'm meant to give up? You wouldn't have any of that bullshit if you were not driven by ego. And being able to clock when you're noticing, like, slipping into that victim mentality of like, oh, well, that must be a sign that I'm not meant to do this particular thing because there's a challenge, or you don't even see it as a challenge, you see it as a block, you see it as a failure. Challenges are in fact there for you to grow, to level up, to it's an opportunity. But so many of us are driven by ego, and we get so distracted by woe is me, why does this always happen to me, this victim mentality, and we waste so much of our energy and we struggle through the challenge so much more than we would have done if we'd just seen it as, okay, it's a challenge, let's just carry on. Let's just, I'm going to take a minute, but I'm going to carry on because I know this is meant to level me up. Think about double the amount of labor you have to do having a victim mentality and then also facing the challenge than if you just got rid of the victim mentality and just thought, okay, cool, it's just a challenge. Like, you save so much emotional labor and so much upset when you are not driven by ego in this sense. The second thing I will say about ego is we often take things personally when they're not personal, and we overthink and agonize over things that are not personal. When we understand that people act in accordance with what's going on in their inner world, we liberate ourselves from taking things personally. We often take things personally as well when we seek validation externally. And again, ego is something that definitely seeks external validation. When we experience ego death, or when we start to kind of work on our egos, we tend to get more validation internally, which leaves us a lot more robust than you would be if you were in this egotistical state of like, oh, everybody hates me, I'm not likable, the world seems to be against me, and so on. And as you can tell, those statements are very much based on getting that external validation of either somebody being like, oh no, that's not true, or something happening which validates either that it's not meant for you, or this is about you, or the world's against you, or the opposite. It's all basing your perception of yourself on external factors, on external validation, and it's really exhausting. It's really fragile grounds to be basing your self-worth on, because you can't control it, you can't control what happens. All you can do is control how you respond to it and your choices that you make. And when you kind of bring that validation from external to internal, you don't struggle as much, because you're not waiting for somebody to let you down. You're not waiting for something bad to happen, because whatever happens, you will, even when good things happen to you, or people say positive things, or you get some kind of external validation, it doesn't have the same hit that it once did. When someone tells me now, like, oh, you're doing really well, I'm like, thank you. I know that I am good at this. You don't have to then be like, yeah, I know I am. You can just be like, yeah, thank you. It's more like an inner confidence. It doesn't have that same kick of like, oh my God, somebody validated me, like somebody backed what I'm doing, because you kind of already know. So that's also kind of coming from a less egotistical place, because you're not relying on either positive affirmations or negative affirmations. You're just from external factors. You're just getting it from you. But unfortunately, when we come from this egotistical place of thinking, I'm only going to do this if somebody else sort of validates it, or work towards this thing if somebody else thinks that I'm good, or somebody else thinks that what I'm doing is worthwhile. Like, you'll be waiting a long time if you're waiting for that. And I think for a long time I was kind of waiting for somebody to tell me that I'm talented in this, that I'm good at this, and I kind of just had to like find it myself. And weirdly, that's kind of stopped me from struggling, because I'm not waiting for my life to start. I'm just taking it by the reins and doing it myself. When you come from this egotistical place, you take things personally that aren't personal. You see kind of lots of things as a personal attack, and you have this victim mentality, and it holds you back. It makes you struggle because you're relying so much on external validation. Anyway, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. It was really interesting talking about this stuff, actually, especially the ego thing, because I think only on reflection have I realised how much I was kind of in that ego space beforehand, and kind of in the past 2 or 3 years have like really moved out of that, and it's liberated me so much. Like it's weird talking about it from like having the victim mentality and taking things personally, because I just really don't do that often now, and it's weird to think that that was such a control in my life at the time. Anyway, I hope you found it kind of validating, or it resonated with you in some way. If you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps me out, and I appreciate it more than I can explain. But with that, have a fantastic remainder of your day. I will see you in my next video. Bye.